Agora is the youngest out of old-school Russian human rights organizations. For a while, sometime after we were set up, not one single human rights organization has not shown up for the several years. We see something showing up, but they come in different projects, and we are still the inertia of the human rights movement of the 1990s, like the spin-off and the inertia, but with somewhat different approach and methods. So originally we are a group hailing from Kazan that later also included groups in Louis and from other regions.
На сегодняшний день у нас офис в Москве.
For a long time we have had an office both in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. For a couple of years we have had an office in Bulgaria. There are 2 lawyers who work with us based in London. They oversee exactly what our liaison with the European Court on Human Rights. But as of today, 30 lawyers and advocates belong to our network across the country, and so to say, we have like umbrella organization across the European Russia. In the long run, whatever should happen in this territory, we can respond within a day or two. Just our lawyers may travel, they come and begin their work. In most cases, they are pro bono. I will discuss, if I have the time, the proof with when our clients have to pay a fee. Well, human rights project Надежда Долгополнина, Maria Alyukhina, and Piotr Versilov, after they were released from prison. This is one media zone. Maybe you have heard, quite a successful in the mass media, which is like a niche and covers stories from court. They have unique technologies of online broadcasts from the courts, which they've developed and started. This is now one of the leading, I would put it this way, media resources in the country, and human rights project known as Focus of Right. It mostly focuses on jail, police, torture, medical care, cases when people die, handbars. How we have been developing. Gradually we have had gradual layering of one topic over the other. So originally we started our work on law enforcement and arbitrary action by the militia. That was the name police was known by till a couple of years ago in Russia. But so Agora, there used to be prosecution people. We have Kazan Human Rights. We see led for some 10 years former person who was in charge of the maximum security prison, chief psychologist, the former chief psychologist of a jail in Tatarstan, Vladimir Rubashnik. Dmitry Din used to be the prosecutioner in the prosecutioner's office in St. Petersburg. Advocate Pavel Chikov for 15 years worked for the law enforcement and things like that. So it's not that we choose them deliberately. It just happened this way. It's convenient to work with these people who are well disciplined. They know how the system works from within, but at that, they refute this pattern commonly held that there is no such thing as formal law enforcement, and you cannot trust formal law enforcement people. No, quite not so. Very often there is a certain shadow that maybe you are cooperating with somebody and continue whatever. That is not so. That is not true. We began our work on law enforcement. That was in the early 2000s. And we worked across the country together with the Committee Against Torture. based in Nizhny Novgorod. You may have heard about them. They still continue to pursue this topic, and that is their only focus, whereas we now go along many different lines. In 2004, just because we learned how to put behind bars the police for torture, we have people wearing balaclavas, attacked an our office there. There was a defamation campaign, and but since we overcame this sort of attack, this bullying attack, but we sort of refuted this attack. For some 9 months we were under very severe pressure. Then it occurred to me that the topic of defense of human rights and NGOs seems very promising, and that is why since 2005 we have been, that is for this reason we are known for that. We are known because we, just like Alexei Navalny, several court hearings we managed him, as well as in the human rights, attempt to life of Kashin and others. But recently, any sort of this notorious case, almost in all cases, would necessarily will be supported by advocates and will be led by advocates if it happens in those regions where we are present. And this is quite a few. Well, they also... It was supplemented with work within non-for-profit organizations to a great extent, responding to the changes in what is relevant for the market. When they adopted back in 2005 a law about the NGOs, that was the name, these amendments were made that included the requirement to report every year before the Ministry of Justice. We realized that NGOs require our support, and we became the only organization that would in court defend the NGOs. That was back in 2006 and 2007. We had several dozen court hearings. The Committee on Mother's Document, Independent Psychiatric Evaluation, many people who received from us that help. And for that matter, it turned out that one could win cases in court. I will just give you statistics. So much for criminal cases. In the last several 10 years, we have had at least 500 criminal investigations against NGOs. The longest list of political prisoners are 360 names. So I think there are more than that. The areas, one out of 4 of them in the last 10 years, we defended them in court. And that 43 criminal cases were stopped, investigations. And 31, it means that they were acquitted in court. It was established they did not commit a crime. And they were criminal case investigations on extremism. It was clear that they were instigated with a specific objective. Those are the ones that we usually call the criminal cases where public figures are persecuted under this pretext. Some regions, for example, in 2007, we were responsible for some 7 a bunch of cases in Samara against chief editor of Novaya Gazeta, about the person who was in charge of Samara's chapter of Golos, and we led 3 cases where we presented her in court, and they were all stopped. Persecution was stopped. So much for the question about that it is widely held that it's impossible or makes no use to do something. May I tell you that it's far from that. What we do, we are really the ones who present our clients in the European Court. In the last years, we've been increasing our presence, and I'm always proud to say that advocates who learned us European Court, they are Bulgarian lawyer Yonka Grozev, who helped us, has been helping us back in 2006 and 2007. In the last 2 years, he is the court. He's a judge from Bulgaria in the European Court of Human Rights. And our lawyers and advocates who handle cases in European Court of Human Rights are actually his former students. We rarely meet him now to avoid conflict of interests. He is saying that he's not going to detain them for the whole term of 9 years. And we hope that the human rights community in Europe will be again getting a good lawyer after he stops exercising the duties of a judge. So we can be proud of that, but on the other hand, he used to help us, but now clearly there is no contact, no help, no support. And whatever you say, and I can tell you what in fact we learned to do in the country twice. We broke down we withstood the attempts on all the accusations on extremism, because criticizing the government or authorities, when any phrase like speaker speaks in very derogatory terms about the police, which could lead to opening the criminal procedure, because that was qualified. Police way again speaks very derogatory way, but if you humiliate somebody based upon his or her social position, this is a criminal case for Russia. We forbid that this practice should be spread, and I don't know. We have a couple dozen criminal cases. It was not 100%. But in 2014, the Supreme Court returned a verdict about some cases on extremism, where it said that criticism of the authorities cannot be considered a clear-cut case of extremism. That is why 2014-2016, this practice was not there. But in recent years, it would return. And this is where we became more active, seeking not to if practice of accusations where any criticism of government officials from Ministry of Prosecution Office or whatever was be considered as extremism, well, that would not be really nice. In Samara again since 2010, in Krasnodar, Irkutsk, there was an attempt to spread this using criminal persecution, for using offline maybe cases where software where you don't use licenses. There is a lawyer, for example, that has a contract with Microsoft, for example, to present the interests of the corporation in criminal persecution as a victim. And police would seize the computers, would send it to the experts, question are there any signs of counterfeit software. Yes, you realize till 2010 all the software was grey, came from grey zones. Well, all those who are over 40 or even over 30, they will remember that we all went just, would buy at some market and ask our friend who would be an IT specialist to put it. on a computer, to install it on our computer. That was a long-time sort of arrangement between police and representatives who held the title when, for not opening the criminal case, the businessman had to pay the sort of bribe. But in point of fact, it started with Saratov, but the main thing started in Samara, when they tried to do it in politically motivated goals, when they would go to the editorial boards of mass media, and they would just seize their computers. What we did nowadays, we held the brief for these criminal cases, and we not one single a case ended in conviction. And this practice is now gone. The New York Times wrote back in 2010 a large article that the Russian Kremlin uses Microsoft to suppress civic activity and freedom of speech in the country. 3 years before that, Russian media wrote about this. Well, Microsoft didn't care about that two pins, but once it was the New York Times that carried this article, the situation has immediately changed. The vice president initiated a meeting in New York City, and several affected journalists and a lawyer, and they discussed possibility to find a systemic solution. And it was found as the so-called one-sided sort of unilateral license, when Microsoft would say that all the software and all the computers of minor media and non-governmental organizations in Russia, and later on in all Soviet space, are announced legal, because that was the will of the title holder. And it was enough to go on the websites of Microsoft.ru or download this license and put in the name of your organization. That was enough for the police not to make it possible for them to start criminal persecution. So in 2011-20, when we had a telephone call panicking in Saratov and Forum, because the police seized their computers, we just told them which website to go to, which check to make, and say, look at them and look what would happen. And they gave it away, and the police were reluctantly seized it. Then they talked to their chiefs, and after that the computers were left in place. Criminal persecution was not opened. That is a story that illustrates this. Well, call for separatism. This is a new article in the Criminal Code, 280.1. Overall, there were 24 criminal cases here. This is a system-wide question for us. For us advocates, it becomes clear that the possibility to influence it systemically happens only in case when we hold briefs for most cases like this. When 100,000 criminal persecutions are opened about the turnover of drugs, and there is a long-standing practice, you can't really seriously influence that. You can't. Or say they are somewhat different. But when this is a new article that calls for separatism or insulting the feelings of religious believers, you should, at the very first stage, get into these criminal cases and hold this case, try to handle this case. Then you would get unique opportunity where you could influence court practice. And this is what is really happening. I don't know how much time I have already used. Well, I've got little time left. Okay, then. Well, but the police, a couple of words, literally. There are also success stories. We have over 200 convicted. Almost all notorious stories about arbitrary actions of the law enforcement that you have heard about in the last dozen years, we have something to say about this. In Bashkirsk, Blagoveshchensk, that was the first notorious case when 1,000 were actually In the streets, some local businessmen just quarreled with local police. They were known as militia at that time. They had a fight, and after that, the special rights police had to cleanse a whole. That was quite a notorious matter, and our advocate was the first to write to the court, and then advocate Stanislav Markelov, who was murdered in 1929 in Moscow, he presented them in court. You must remember the notorious story of Major Yevsikov, who's sort of like American-style short people in the streets. In the streets and supermarket, that was the first policeman who received life sentence. Our advocate for that matter, Irina Khronova, who actually graduated from this school, represented this case. It has nothing to do. She represented the interests of 3 victims. He received life sentence. What is interesting about this story is that both Yevsikov and the victims, they both went to the European Court of Human Rights. Yevsikov was complaining that he was sent to serve time to Yamal Peninsula, into the so-called polar prison, and pretty far away from home, and his family cannot visit him and visit him often. And that is a very interesting story. His complaints were communicated. It will be heard, this case, but the victims went to court too, because they did not receive one single kopeck of compensation for what Yevsikov did on them, because qualification did not allow to give a case to the Treasury. Last December there was a very interesting, when European Court recognized that that violated the right to life, and this is a very rare case when those who went to court are alive, and they recognized there in what has to do not compliance of the government on adequate compensation for the victims. And the last most notorious story about tortures in Russia's police, and this is a history in my own city of Kazan, from Dalny. You all must have heard of it. It so happened that the story happened exactly where it was not supposed. This is where we are. And we certainly, for us that was a matter of honor, and we certainly totally changed the policy of the courts, of the Ministry of Justice and police about Tatarstan. For 5.5 years have elapsed since then. Over 500 policemen were recognized, were found guilty, most of them they just totally cleansed the ministry. The police in Tatarstan is not really using violence. I'm quite confident, I know that. Why? Because among the people who say, why, God, no, because every time, in every unit, there is somebody who now serves time, who was their former colleague, who now serves time for torture. So in point of fact, we are controlling this. Regrettably, we couldn't turn it across Russia as a whole. That was our desire, that was our initiative, but it didn't work. And I suppose I would stop at that. If there are any questions, I would stop here.